Just work your shoulders, snap your fingers, one and all, in the hall and the ball, that's all.
In the early 20th century, racial segregation limited the professional opportunities of African Americans, but architect Samuel Plato overcame remarkable odds to design and construct buildings across the country. In Louisville, Kentucky, where he spent the majority of his life, he is well remembered. But in Marion, Indiana, where he launched his career, his legacy is largely forgotten. Most of his buildings are already lost to history, with only 7 remaining in Marion, and some still face the threat of deterioration.
So Plato came to Marion, presumably to find employment in the architectural field. And when he came to Marion, it was in the middle of the gas boom. It was a time when the Klan was very active in Indiana. And as you probably know, Indiana had one of the highest members of the Klan of any state, including southern states like Mississippi and Alabama. And in doing his work, he faced a lot of challenges. For example, when he would have a work site in progress, some of his materials would be stolen. Sometimes his clients would take his plans after he had done the architectural design work, then refuse to pay him. It wasn't the clients who wanted to hire him who gave him the most trouble. It was the contractors and the other employees of those contractors who refused to work with African Americans. And an example was the Marion High School.
And he worked for the school for a while, and then he was called into the superintendent's office. And he said, "I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to let you go." And he said, "Why?" He said, "Is it my work? Is it not good enough?" And he said, "No, it's not that at all." He said, "It's my white crew doesn't want to work with you." And he said something like, "Although you do not want to work with me, someday you will want to work for me," to the other white crews.
So Plato and others showed through their work the evidence of the ability of African Americans to do anything that anyone else could do.
I mean, at the time he was practicing in 1913 in Marion, that was 17 years before the lynching that occurred there in 1930. So I just can't imagine the barriers that he faced. I mean, we're talking about architects like Paul Williams, who came after him, who used to draw upside down so he could communicate with his white clients who would sit next to him.
So that kind of racism actually is empowering. People who experience that will find some determination that is so deep in their spirit and their souls that they will excel beyond imagination and belief because of that opposition. And this was the case with Samuel Plato.
Despite the segregation he faced, Plato's influence expanded in his lifetime. He built nearly 40 post offices across the country and was one of the first African American architects to receive federal contracts. He constructed federal dormitories for African American workers during World War II, and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt formally dedicated some of Plato's dorms in Washington, D.C., saying she was highly pleased with the accommodations.
It's kind of sad to say, despite the color of his skin, like that's some kind of ailment, but it was an ailment in a segregated society, institutionally segregated society. I can't imagine what the experience was like. How did he achieve that? I can't imagine it. If I had no role models, then I probably wouldn't be sitting here in this chair. As the first Black faculty member in this department, as the first Black tenured faculty, as the first Black chair, little things like that make all the difference in the world. For someone to tell me that a Black architect designed that church in Marion, Indiana in 1913, wow. You know, I might be on the street. I might say, I could do that. I could do that.
So here we have a blueprint of the First Friends Church on South Adams Street. It's one of the only blueprints of Samuel Plato's buildings that we have. It was one of the first churches in Marion. The Quaker denomination was very prolific with civil rights, racial justice stuff. That's a big part of Quakerism. They hired Samuel Plato to build the reconstruction of their church as they were expanding their denomination.
The church functioned there for years, and in the 70s, I'm not sure exactly what happened in that community, but I would imagine that it became increasingly minority and poor. The church moved and probably rented it out for some period of time. The last tenant became an owner. It was a tiny congregation that I don't think was able to support the maintenance demands of that church and allowed it to continue to fall into disrepair. And so it has sat empty for years.
When people are not occupying a building, the deterioration accelerates. Buildings need our presence. They need the warmth of our bodies.
During the last few years, I was president of SOS Marion, which is our affiliate of landmarks, and we encourage historic restoration of buildings. And we surveyed the project, and we just couldn't take it on. It was too large for us.
It's one of the 10 most endangered buildings in the state of Indiana as designated by Indiana Landmarks. And with that, there's greater emphasis placed on it because there was a movement in Marion to demolish the building as a nuisance.
And as you can see, there's a large piece of plywood. I think this for me is one of the saddest things about it. Had a gorgeous stained glass window, really beautiful. And you know, when the sun was in the right place, the whole place just glowed inside.
We are in the midst of loss of many buildings. Some of Samuel Plato's buildings no longer exist.
But Indiana Landmarks is currently restoring the roof of the church to help preserve its skeleton so it doesn't collapse. And hopefully in the next few years, someone will come along and help redevelop the church into something that would be living in the community.
So the idea of it becoming something else or an adaptive reuse that still respects the architectural heritage and the cultural heritage of the building is paramount.
I have seen reuse of beautiful structures time after time. People who saw the beauty in this building, as you look around, you see the wonderful stained glass and the pipe organ and all of these beautiful features. And you would never expect that this would become an office. But this is the home office of Indiana Landmarks. So we are looking now at helping this small congregation find a developer that will see the beauty in that church site in Marion for it to be reused as well. And we believe that it can look just as beautiful as this site here. But we do know that there are other Plato buildings in Marion that are being reused. The Hostess House, for example, is a beautiful structure, and it's a community space. Now, when you see a Plato building standing in its glory, knowing that this black man, against all odds, designed this building, you're proud of that. You know, and when you're proud of a thing, you then want to protect it, you want to preserve it. It reflects victory. It reflects resilience. That is very healing. I know this is work that has to be done, and I am in the army of doing it.